All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started and maybe we'll get a few more that will trickle in. And welcome again to everyone. Again, my name is CJ Shields. I'm from the Center for Teaching Excellence. You can see I have the original date on there. We had these scheduled. Unfortunately, Nolan had a family emergency and needed to reschedule. So hopefully everything is going well with Nolan and his family now. He is an engagement specialist with Perusall, and he is going to be leading our session for us today. And I'm a senior educational consultant with the Center for Teaching Excellence. I will be monitoring the chat, answering any questions you have. I will also note the first two sessions of this was a 3-session training. The first 2 sessions were recorded, and if you would like the links to those, I will share those in the chat once we get started here. So you can review those at your leisure after we finish the session today. But our learning outcomes for today are to develop resources for an in-depth questions and exploration in Perusall, construct the assignment you want in a sandbox course, and to address common questions and technical challenges. And Nolan's done a really good job of customizing this for our needs here at A&M. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Nolan and let him lead us from here.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, CJ. Yes. All right, everyone. I am going to grab the screen here and we're going to jump on in. And so, sure, it's all set up. All right. So we are back in one of my demo courses here that we've been using for our previous demonstrations here. And today what we're going to look at is some ways to incorporate Perusall with all the kind of foundational information that we've had in the previous webinars. And we're also going to take a look at ways you can fit Perusall to meet your particular needs, because some folks use this in the non-traditional manner with their students. And so we want to make sure that we're accommodating everyone. And so one of the first things we're going to jump into are some of our advanced settings that we have here and advanced features. And so those are going to be found here under settings. So we're going to navigate here to our settings bar and we're going to come here into advanced. And one of the first things we're going to discuss here is allowing students to download materials. So a lot of instructors have layered courses that lead into the next, and they want to be able to have their students download things with comments embedded from their peers so that they have those as study materials and you know, things for the ways to keep a hold of that information if need be. So there is an option here under advanced to allow students to download material. Now, this only applies to material that you've uploaded as the instructor. You cannot apply this to any textbooks that you utilize. And so some instructors also don't want this to be possible. They want to keep everything housed in the Perusall platform and keep the courses accessible to students. There are ways, and the reason we keep this setting here, there are ways to make the courses archived. So they'll be accessible to you, but the accessibility will go away for your students. And in those scenarios, instructors like to allow their students to be able to download those course materials so that they can use them at later times. So that's one of our important advanced features that I wanted to address. Another is, as you've seen in our previous demonstrations, Perusall's social learning platform, we encourage students to interact with one another. It's how they pull better material out of or better information out of the material. And one of the options is the avatars that are live in the content. So you'll see those little bubbles in the upper left-hand corner of your assignment. Students will see those bubbles for each of their students. And it's this little avatar here. It's your name and your little image you've put in. And some instructors, this comes turned on by default. Some instructors don't want this activated. They want to keep students focused on the conversations in the chat and not have those avatars appear. If that applies to you, this is where you can toggle that feature on and off. So it is fantastic for the social learning, but depending on the course and the students, it is something that your students may find as a distraction, and this is where you can turn that on and off. And the next advanced feature that I want to touch on is relating to that is chats. So here under library and assignments, we have the ability to turn off those avatars. And part of having those avatars is that you can click into them and engage in one-on-one chats. Now, if you want to keep the avatars so that students can still be a part of that social learning environment and see, oh, I'm working with Jane Doe or John Smith right now, and have conversations in the comment threads, you can keep that system alive. And then you can come here to chats and you can just disable the one-on-one chats that a student may engage with in those avatars. So you can keep the avatars up and running, but you can turn off the chats so that the students can see, oh, these are my peers that I'm with right now. I'm going to have the conversations in the comment thread only. That's a tactic a lot of our instructors use as well. It's a great way to keep the social aspect alive and thriving, but make sure that all conversations are being held in the appropriate area. So those are some advanced features that I just wanted to touch on real quick. And then we're going to talk about now how we can fit Perusall to meet our particular needs if it's not your traditional student course model or not your traditional grading setup. So we have this option here, terminology. Now, I've mentioned this a little briefly in the past where you can customize the way Perusall is structured here. But taking that to the next level, this is where you can really fit Perusall to meet all of your needs. And it actually starts here. So if you're not teaching a course, but you're teaching a lab or a lab practical, or if it's a certain type of physics or chemistry course or a certain type of honors or humanities course where it has a particular title instead of a course. One particular example that comes to mind for me is I helped a professor who taught a honors humanity course that focused on group conversations. All the students would sit in a circle. And so instead of calling it a course, they called it a discussion. Well, it was history to a certain point, discussion group. And then it had the honors title in there. And then instead of an instructor, it was a facilitator. And instead of students, they were speakers. And so we fit that mold. And you can do that with any sort of course setup that you have. It doesn't have to be strict. We have a course with an instructor and students and TAs. So when you fit that, you get the labeling correct so that students are in an environment that is connected to what they're experiencing in the classroom. You then take that information and you head over here to general. So once you have the terminology dialed in, this is now where you can detail how Perusall will evaluate your students in accordance to how you've built out your system here in Perusall. So going back to that humanities example, that course was completely dependent in the classroom on discussion. And then students would then go to the readings. They take what they heard from the discussion, they'd apply it to the conversations and the readings and the things they were pulling out of there, and then relate that back to the classroom and use that in real time. And so instead of having the system evaluate students for the automatic grading, the instructor kept the engagement analytics, but they went with manual grading here. So you do have 4 options. You could do the automatic grading, which is going to do all the things in accordance to your scoring settings for automatic scoring, and the engagement analytics. That's what most of our instructors use. But the next is to do manual grading. So you turn off all 7 of those parameters. You set up an automatic grading. You keep all the engagement analytics, but then you're providing feedback and you're grading the students' work on your own in the gradebook. And it's a great option for certain types of course setups that may fit that mold, such as the one we just talked about, humanities. There's also ones where students do lab practicals and they use Perusall here to upload, kind of in the form of a peer review, their own version of the procedure for a lab. Then students go through and comment it, and they turn off the manual grading or the automatic grading because it's a different system, and they go with the manual. So great use there. We also have these 2 here to disable all analytics and grading entirely. These are great for discussion courses, things like that, or not discussion courses, study groups. So a lot of times instructors organize study groups that are connected to their course for their students, where there's no oversight, there's no grading, there's no analytics. It's just a space for students to access material, study with one another, and have that interaction outside of the assignments they need to be completed. So it's a great thing to set up there. And again, you use the terminology to fit that mold. And the last option here is to disable grading entirely, but keep the engagement analytics. This can be great for a lot of folks will set this up to train people. So if you're training folks on how to use Perusall, if you're training your TAs and you want to make sure they're actually going through the material and doing the training, you can set up a course here using this particular scoring and analytics style. And that actually takes us into the next kind of bigger part with now having all that information is a sandbox environment. So you can take your course and you can build it out the way you need, but it may not be one that's for students. Maybe you need to create a training space for your TAs, for other instructors. But as the facilitator of that sandbox course, you want to ensure that the folks you're bringing into training are participating in the material. They're logging in, they're reading through, they're practicing here and there. This is a great space to have the grading disabled, but the analytics in play can really assist with that. Now, to create a sandbox course, whether it's connected to Blackboard or it's a standalone course through Perusall, very simple to do so. You simply create a course in either fashion that you would, which we've detailed in previous webinars. And once your course is created, you'll, of course, be brought to your starting page. And instead of having to do anything here, you simply come over to Settings, General, and then you scroll down to the bottom and you have an option here for this is a test or demonstration course. Now, what you'll do is you'll select this option, you'll click Save Changes, and what will happen is you'll notice your course will no longer live here under My Courses. So this is where all your live courses exist, where your students will be housed and things like that. Your next option down are your archived spaces. So these are courses where your end date has come to pass, so the courses are no longer active. And now you'll get a new area, My Test Courses, which is where you have a risk-free environment. It's very difficult for students to accidentally get into one of these. The access codes are different, the LMS setup, like all of it. You have to purposely get someone into a test course. And that's the great place about this environment is once you have it set as a test course, you can then come to Settings, you can come to Access. And if it's a standalone course, you would provide the enrollment code or the URL to have folks join as students. Now, this is a great way to bring your instructors in as students to learn the Perusall system from the student side so they can see what their students are going to experience. They can participate in mock assignments. The other great use of these sandbox courses are if you're building a course and you want to see what an assignment would look like from the student side. Maybe you're experimenting with peer review. Maybe you're experimenting with a differentiated assignment. You want to see how that looks from the student side. You would join that course as a student, see what you've built, and go from there. And that's where you could use two separate emails. So if your university account is the one you have linked as the instructor, you could join as a student from your private Gmail account, and then you can see it in that risk-free environment. You can play around with the system. Great tool for that. The other option, adding instructors, the system's the same. You add them with an email, and this is a great way to bring other instructors in and show them this is how you build out your settings. This is how you do this or that. And this is how you create certain types of assignments. These are the analytics you'll be given. Great space to train folks. The biggest use, I would say, for these sandbox courses is to train TAs. This is where folks will create a mock course. They'll build out an assignment or two, and they'll say, okay, with the permissions that you have, I want you to go through and see how the system operates in a risk-free environment, how you interact with the students, and what tools you have at your disposal. That way, your TAs go into the live courses knowing how to use the system. They don't have to fumble around, and they're ready to hit the ground running. It's also great if you need your TAs to have that expanded set of permissions that we've talked about. And instead of adding them as TAs, you're adding them as instructors. Again, another great environment to bring them in, train them on the material without them jumping in live and not having that experience. So you can have this sandbox course set up. Now, the great thing about a sandbox course too is you can actually have it mirror your live course. So you can build out your live course, and if you want to create the sandbox as a place to experiment around, that's where having this tool comes into play. Materials from another course. When you build your sandbox shell, you can then copy over all the material here, which we've discussed before, and then you can have basically a carbon copy, but without your students. Then you can see, okay, this would be what it would be like if I were to set it up, building these types of assignments or changing around, these certain settings. And so it's a great space to experiment with build outs of material, with training folks. And most importantly, it's a very great space to come around and play around with the scoring. So if you're still taking the time and you want to see, okay, I want to, does this setup particularly work well? You can create that sandbox course. You can come in with a test account and you can come through and be like, all right, this is the normal behavior of my students. How did this appear here in terms of scoring? And a lot of instructors do that with their TAs or things like that to see how the system is going to evaluate their students and really lock in a scoring setup that they're going to use on, into the future. And so it's a great fit space for folks who want to do that. By no means mandatory. That is for folks who really want to go through that process and they take the time to really dial it in. As we've said from the beginning, you can set a course up in 15 minutes and get students in 5. This is just the advanced stuff. If you want to really take this to the next level and create a powerhouse social learning environment with top tier engagement metrics, this is the way to build yourself up to have that ability. And so this is a good space to do that. And with that being said, do we have any questions? Is there any I can address about sandbox environments, terminology, making this fit perhaps? I know we have a smaller group today. I think there's only 6 folks in today. So if you have a particular question that's specific to your setup, more than happy to answer it today.
Nothing in the chat right now, Nolan, thank you. But yeah, anybody feel free to chime in with questions you have.
Yeah. And that's another thing along the way. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. I'm more than happy to pause. But with no questions right now, that is going to take us to some things that you can do that are tricks that I've learned from other instructors, feedback, working with them directly on certain types of assignment builds that are something you can incorporate into any type of structured assignment you have in Perusall, whether it's peer review, differentiated, multi-part, single part, whatever it may be. There are some nifty things that instructors have done that I've learned and now teach. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is some instructors build Perusall with the initial goal of to get conversations started with their students. So they'll embed prompts. So what students or instructors will do is when creating an assignment, for example, they'll add the particular material here. And once they are going through the, wrong button, sorry. Once they are building the assignment, they have their material chosen that they want. For this example, we'll take this 3-part assignment. When they get to the options, this is where instructors are doing really interesting things. So doesn't matter the discipline. I've helped instructors build this out from physics to humanities and everything in between with social sciences. Instead of just setting up the course as you normally would for students to log in, start communicating with one another and start highlighting, and instead of leaving little guides or little quick questions or prompts throughout, instructors will build full-scale prompts that are almost equivalent to like an essay style question. But what they'll do is they'll come in here into the instructions for students and they'll detail out, you have 6 prompts throughout the material. Please make sure to address all 6 of these questions, answer them, before moving on to the rest of the material. And it's a more structured approach to the Perusall system. And it's an amazing kind of built-in feature that instructors are utilizing now, because they have the ability, it's almost like a quiz within the reading without it being labeled as a quiz. And then instructors come in and they evaluate. So they'll put that direction here. They'll tell their students, all right, throughout the material, there are 7 questions. This is where they're located. They put that information in here. And then they come through, they set everything up as they normally would. And then they go into the assignment itself, and instructors will highlight a particular portion, and they will, I'll find a blank spot here. They'll write out their essay question, heavily used demo course here. So they'll highlight their portion. This is where it'll relate to, and they'll write out their question. And when they write out that question, they will require their students, before seeing anybody else's responses, they'll use this button here, which we've covered before. They require students to respond to this comment before they can see other replies. Now, the interesting thing about this setup in this particular move is, with these structured kind of essay style questions built into the assignment, instructors will then go in and they'll manually grade the responses. And then they'll leave the interaction between the students as kind of a bonus situation. So they set the scoring up in these to be fully reliant on the comment content only. And then they come in and they grade their responses accordingly based on that either. And you can set up that customization in scoring as well to reflect that kind of assignment style. And it's become a very widely used feature. A lot of instructors don't know that they can actually do that. And so that's the process. You give your students those detailed instructions, you build the questions out in their appropriate places, and then the students can't see any of their peer responses until they answer the questions themselves. And then what instructors will do is they'll come in and grade those responses manually. And that, it's not the norm for every assignment. One of the courses I helped an instructor do this for was a law course, where they would break down a deposition, and then he had questions built into it. And so it was perfect for that kind of setup. And again, this works great for any sort of STEM course. I've helped folks in organic chemistry do this kind of thing. And so it's a really neat feature in Perusall that instructors have developed on their own that I really want to make folks aware of once they have that good understanding of the system, because it uses a lot of different things. You got to go in that custom scoring. You have to make sure you're using this option here to ensure that students are replying first. And it's that clear direction. That way, when students come into the assignment for the first time, they get this direction here. Okay, I have 7 questions I need to answer. This is where they're located. I need to go in and do that. And fantastic tool to utilize. Great way to get more engagement, and great way to build in quizzes or in almost like a testing feature that isn't a strict test or quiz, if you know what I'm saying. Do we have any questions about that, the setup there, before I move on to the next bit of material? Awesome. Okay. So with that being said, and that kind of setup and assignments, there is another really interesting setup that instructors will do as well. And that is to have, forgive me, students. So the same kind of prompts that we just discussed as instructors, instructors will have students build out their own material, as we've talked about before, in the form of a PDF, Word document, or a PowerPoint. And instead of having this be a peer review assignment, what a lot of folks do is, in your course, you may do you may do group-based projects, like perhaps you utilize a flipped classroom model. And so everything is done based on these groups, and these groups stick together, and they need to be working on their own material that they've generated in that group, providing feedback and things like that. That is possible as well. And to do that, you're actually going to navigate and start here in settings. And you're going to head to grouping. And now instead of doing the automatic grouping that we've discussed, you're going to do specify groups. Now with a flipped classroom model or a one where groups do not change throughout the entirety of the course, this is great. These groups are never shuffled. You can import them from a spreadsheet. So if you already have your roster configured in these configured in these groups that you know are going to stick together, you can import that spreadsheet. If you have it built out in your Blackboard, you can import them from Blackboard. And if you just want to come through and organize them here and provide each group a name, you can do so. Now, the reason that you have to start here is once you build out this setup and you have your group set up and you click Save Changes, now, if you're doing these group-based assignments and you don't want to assign everything to the class at once, you'll notice that when you create an assignment, you can, one, select, see from each folder we have in here, here's the student upload folder. So here's our works, saying you can title this like group 1, group 2, group 3, so students know which folder to upload to. You can select their work that that's gonna be particular, either they've uploaded it themselves or it's work you want that particular group to work on. You bring it in here, you come to options, you detail everything out as you normally would, but instead of assigning this to the entire class, you go to a specific group. And this option is only available for that specified groups. And this way, only these students will be evaluated for working on the material. They'll only be graded for that. So it's a great way to do that flipped classroom group style only setup where you're assigning certain things to certain groups only. It could be student generated material, your material, whatever it may be, but it's a great way to have that system developed in the classroom to keep with that model that you're doing. And so that's how you set that up. Again, it starts in settings. You have to make sure you have specified groups set as the foundation there. Then you build out your assignments, whether it's having students upload material, whatever it may be, and then you can assign it to specific groups. Great tool. A lot of folks use it. We've had a lot of people switch to the flipped classroom model where it's an entire course worth of group work where everyone's working on different projects. Great way to make sure that you can capture that learning environment here in Perusall as well. And all right, does anyone have any questions about that before we hop on to some troubleshooting issues that are students experience often and sometimes instructors as well?
As of now, there's still nothing in the chat.
Awesome. All right. Well, then we're going to jump into some very common things that students typically present to instructors when they're having issues. And then the instructors usually go to their IT ID admin folks with the issues, and then those usually come to us. So these are the most common ones that students will present to you that you can address. And it's they're all pretty standard, and you're going to see what I mean by that. The first is students being unable to see comments. It's usually a great cause for concern. Students panic. They say the system's not working, it's broken, and then they go from there. The case with students not being able to see comments. So as we've mentioned, Perusall is broken into groups. That is almost the standard, whether it's automatic groups, whether it's specific groups, or Blackboard groups, whatever it may be. That's the norm. Sometimes students happen to be in groups that are with students that may have not gotten to the assignment yet. So for example, if a student is an early bird to the assignment, get in there, they knock out a bunch of comments, they read through it all the way, and then they sit there waiting, where is everybody? And they may have gotten to that group earlier than the rest, put their comments in, no one's had a chance to respond. Now here's where the issue comes into play. Students often don't grasp that they're in a group and that group is private, and so they can't see their fellow students' work who may be in a separate group. So they may text one of their friends, and in that case, the friend's like, oh yeah, I'm in Perusall, it's working great for me, I'm talking to so-and-so, it's going fine. Panic sets in, they say their system's broken, this isn't going to grade me, and then they reach out to you. That happens for one of two reasons. As we've said, they're early to the assignments, so their peers haven't shown up yet. So we advise you always tell your students, give it some time, wait for your peers to respond and get in and work on the assignment. Or in a less frequent situation, students are in a group that is lacking in participation, which does happen every once in a while, or they happen to be in a group where some of the students have dropped the course, which again does happen every once in a while. Few and far between, but does occur. The most often is they're just early to the assignment. But in the case of them being in a group that is inactive, that is something that you, the instructor, can see, and you have a couple of options. You can remind their peers, hey, do your Perusall assignment, interact with your peers, get to work, or you can come in to your course library. And in your library, when you click on pieces of material, well, let me switch this around real quick. It's dependent upon two things. If you have automatic grouping in place and you come into your course library, you'll notice when you click on a piece of material, you have the option for groups. So if your students happen to be placed automatically in a group that isn't very active or that has students that have dropped, you can click them and you can drag them to whatever group they may need to be in. You can also reshuffle the groups at any time. That's not the best solution. That's more something to do before the assignment starts. What we recommend is if you have a student like Tyler here who may be in an inactive group, you just click and drag them to a group that is. Whether it's students have dropped or whatever it may be, that way they have a chance to participate in the assignment. That's option one. Option two, in settings, if you have the specify grouping option enabled, instead of doing it within the library, you'll come do it here. So let's see if I can find Tyler quickly. If Tyler's in group 2 and it's not working out well, you can move them to group 3. It's that quick. Very easy to do so. Now Tyler's in a group that's active. Now you can go through and adjust things accordingly. So that's one way to deal with students not seeing their peers' comments in an assignment. That's the number one reason why they don't see them. Number two reason is actually this little menu here. A lot of students like to come into the assignment and they come to this drop-down menu and they click no comments. Students like to read a distraction-free material before they go through. They want to leave their own comments first without seeing what other people wrote, and they want to just come through and get through it on their own terms. A lot of students love to do this. It's a great distraction-free way for them to go through the material. Now, the only issue with this is sometimes students forget to turn that off. And this is what can happen when students forget to do that. They can come in, see the material, and they can highlight, big highlight. Let's do a quick little highlight here. They come in and they leave their comment. Hit enter. There's their comment. It appeared wonderfully. And then they scroll through and they, click in and they go in and leave another comment, and then they go back to check on their material and their comment's gone. Doesn't appear. Now the student panics. They're worried that they're not going to get credit, that their well-written comment just got erased by the system. And they reach out to you, the instructor, saying none of my work is saving. It's not the case. What has happened is they forgot to turn off the no comments button here. When they go back to my comments, you'll see there it is. It appears, nothing happened. And when they go back to all comments, still there. It's only when they have no comments, when they scroll past it, it goes away to keep preserved that fresh screen. That's the other reason why students won't see their own comments. It's one of those two. And the final issue that students really face that is often very difficult for them is this issue. And it's hard to describe, so I'm just going to show it here. If you watch the comment bubble here, students might say, my comments disappear as fast as I can type them. This is typically what it looks like. It does happen every now and again. This is because of browser extensions and tools that your students have employed in their browser. It interferes with the system. Not a lot of them do. Some do, mostly the ones that are like advanced grammar and spelling ones that, those can interfere. So what we recommend is in those particular situations, have your students just turn off those extensions. That way the system can operate as it normally should. and there's no interference. That is the cause of this situation happening. So you simply just tell your students, hey, please make sure that you have any browser extensions or tools disabled before using Perusall. And those are the standard issues with students that get presented to folks. And those are the solutions. The other common issues that students face sometimes is accessing the material or your Perusall course, but that's usually user error. So sometimes students outthink what they really need to do. And so if you have your system connected to Blackboard, as you know, all your students need to do is come to your Blackboard instance, click an assignment link, and they get loaded right here. They don't have to create an account. They don't have to do anything. Sometimes students don't follow that instruction that you've given them or click the necessary links, and they see Perusall assignment. So they take it upon themselves to go to perusall.com, and then they can't find it, but now they've created an account. Perhaps they've created an account with a personal email. In that particular case, when they log into Perusall from your Blackboard, they may encounter an error screen. That error screen will say there's already an account that's been created with your name and information. Do you want to merge them? For some reason, when students see this, they think it's a big error, that it might cause the loss of information, that something strange may happen. It won't. Nothing ever gets deleted. Nothing ever gets lost. So if your students ever come to you presenting that issue, you just tell them simply to merge the account. They get a confirmation email, they click it, everything's smooth sailing from there. And then just tell them, please log in through Blackboard. You don't need to go through perusall.com. And that's another outside of the system issue that is very common with our students. But simple solutions, easy to fix. Does anybody have any questions about those? Awesome. Okay. Hopefully I haven't bored everyone to sleep, but it does happen. We are on a Friday, so I do apologize if you all know this already. But this is more of our very advanced look at things. And so our last topic of conversation we're going to cover here today is some questions that instructors bring up very, very often. The number one thing is, how do I tell my students how to earn credit? How does that work? Do I give them a strict rubric? Do I tell them they need to leave X amount of comments? That depends. So the general answer that I typically provide in the webinars when going through these is, don't give your students a strict rubric. Once they finish that rubric, their motivation tends to die away and they don't check back. So instead, in our settings, general, we have a welcome message, stick to this script. Perusall is a very organic platform. It's very easy for students to earn credit in the sense of earning credit comes naturally. It's not easy in the sense of like they just can click in and get instant credit. It's easy in the sense of it's just that the procedure they go through is a natural engagement with the platform. Now, with that being said, we're going to take a little more in-depth look at this. This can change dependent upon the type of course, the discipline, things like that. There are a lot of instances where being a little more explicit and using a more strict rubric of sorts comes into play, specifically for our STEM users. If you're uploading material where your students are solving formulas, they're coming through and they're leaving solutions to problems, that's a different type of scenario. In that type of course where students are just leaving those quick responses that are either confirmed as being correct, or it's nope, you need to switch it up. Here's the correct version, a brief explanation, and then folks don't really need to elaborate further than that, and students just agree. That's where you change up the direction you're giving your students. There's a certain amount of questions you need to answer. Please answer them and then discuss amongst yourselves. You formulate it more than based on the interaction with the material your students are going to have. STEM courses in particular, that's where a little more explicit direction becomes important, especially in chemistry, OChem, physics, mathematics, any of that, where it's a lot of formula-driven work, a lot of solution-driven work. That's where you start to be a little bit more explicit here in the rubric. Now, On the other side of that equation, we are going to go and talk about humanities and social sciences. That's where, again, you have, depending on the type of course, there is a more strict interpretation of what is considered a high quality, medium quality, or low quality comment, or whatever configuration of grading that you have. If your students aren't simply leaving conversation comments where they're pulling more information out of the material, they're answering questions, they're engaging with each other, there's back and forth, they're writing well-written comments. If it's beyond that, in the scope of, like, I've helped literature courses where, hey, when you respond to, like, they're writing 7 or 8 paragraph massive comments that need a deep evaluation, that need to be that length, and that's where you need to be a little more explicit too. So if that's what you're hoping to achieve with your Perusall experience for your students, you need to be explicit with that here in the welcome message for students. That's where you're going to guide them in that type of thing. And the welcome message is also a great place for you to explain to your students what sort of social learning environment you want to develop here. So that, I want to reference back to that humanities honors course, where it was that discussion of what students were going to be, it was a course where students were sitting in a circle and they were discussing a topic for the entirety of the course. The instructor and I sat down, we're like, okay, what's your goal? And the goal for them was to take that conversation in the classroom and have it be built off of what the students read and started talking about in Perusall. So with that in mind, students were instructed here to actually leave prompts and then take those prompts with their computers into class, take notes however they could get it there, and use that to discuss in class. So that information was presented here as well. And so that's where you can help guide your students, because the instructor would evaluate them based on that. So if it's not your traditional model that we've covered here in Perusall, and you're doing something a little more advanced or a little more, customized to your teaching style, this is your area to detail that out for your students so that they know how to navigate the system. Because with those unique types of teaching models, the scoring typically reflects that. And so if it's outside of this very standard organic way to earn credit with Perusall, this is where you need to be explicit with that. For all other things, if you're customizing the scoring as you normally would, and your students are engaging with the material as we've discussed in these last 3 webinars, and then please leave this as it is, because it's a great way for your students to understand the platform and know exactly what to do. But for those particular advanced ways, this is the best place for you to provide that information. But that does bring us to the end of the material I was going to cover today.